The way the steering is currently set up, it works, but it looks terrible, and it's going to stick out past my front grille. So we're going to make some changes. I replaced the flat tie rods, these things, with the little swivels on the end. That made the steering a lot better, and it's also adjustable now. I'm going to cut this weld, and I'm going to stand this up vertically, and it's strictly for aesthetics on the front end, because I don't want this thing sticking out where it shows. And then I think what I'm going to do is run a chain drive from here up to the top of the cowling and run it straight and then angle up. So kind of a big decision here, but I think in the long run it'll be best. So that's what we're going to do. All these parts are welded together, so when you go backwards you got to unweld. And sometimes the welds are pretty easy to get to, and sometimes they're pretty hard to get to. These two weren't too bad. So then I turned the mounting plate up vertical and tacked it, and I was pretty sure I was going to have to cut it free again later on, and actually I think I ended up cutting it free several more times. I took apart an old bicycle wheel, and I got the sprocket cluster, and I took it apart, and I'm going to use those on the steering. Put the biggest sprocket on the bottom part of the steer, and I'm going to put the smallest sprocket up top. I tried to weld the sprocket onto this pulley, but this is, I don't know what that is, pot metal or something. I couldn't do it, so I'm going to have to order something. But this is what I've got so far. I turned the bracket up 90 degrees, and I had to shorten this shaft a little bit because it was hitting down here. And then, so I re-welded this steering arm, and I welded the big chain sprocket to a steel pulley sheave that fit the bolt, same diameter, and I welded it on there. So this is all welded together. And the reason I wanted to do this was mainly, see that this thing doesn't even turn 90 degrees. So if you got a cart and you're going fast down the road and lock to lock is less than 90 degrees, that can be kind of intimidating. So by putting the biggest sheave here and the littlest sheave up top, I will gear it down, and I'll have at least a half a turn lock to lock. That's my goal. So the upper shaft where the chain's going to fall from is going to hang from the bottom of the little front I don't know, hood area, whatever you call it, and I have a shape that I like, so I'm going to use that to help me make a steel frame which will support the hood, and it will also support the steering shaft and the chain. I cut up some little angle and made two frames for the front end, and I think if I take this off now and finish welding it and paint it and paint the floor, tomorrow I can put it back and actually start figuring out the gas pedal and the throttle, because I don't have what I need to finish the steering. I'll have to order something. This bearing I got up front is pretty crappy. This is the bearing I cut out of those little wheel hubs. Let me show you what I learned. So these were the bearings that came out of the hub. This is the other hub that matches it, and they're just not good bearings. Now I have this sleeve of 5/8 bearings that I purchased when I thought my front axle was 5/8, and they are the same OD. So I pulled out the crappy bearings. I'm going to press in the good bearings, which makes a good bearing holder. I want to do that up here, and unfortunately I got it welded to beat all heck. So I'm going to try to cut this end off, cut the nut off with the grinder, and then drill and tap a bolt so I can put it back. I'm trying to save what I've done so far. So this little axle, or this little pivot, is nothing more than a big bolt with the hardware welded to the far end, and the only way I could get it apart without just destroying everything, I cut the head off the bolt, and then I drilled and tapped the end where the head was, and I was able to reuse everything just by bolting threading a bolt in the new hole. So it worked out good. It's a simple little swap to remove the bearing housing that have the marginal bearings and replace it with the bearing housing that has good bearings. Made a big difference. So much better. This is a it's a 3/8 drive by 1/2 inch swivel socket that I haven't used in probably 15 years, but probably I'll need it tomorrow. Making some brackets to hold up the upper steering shaft from some old riding lawnmower parts. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 tries to get them right, but I have a pretty much unlimited supply of old riding lawnmower brackets that I can work from. I'm fabricating a bearing holder with this 1/4 inch all thread rod, and I thought it would be good because it would let me adjust the bearing angle a little bit to make sure everything lines up properly, and it works, but it's not really strong. And at the steering wheel end of the steering shaft I need something stronger, so it's going to be replaced in a later video with something a little more robust.
I got ashes on my forehead and gumbo on my chin. Know where I'm a-going and I know where I've been. I was born in Louisiana, state of original sin. I've got ashes on my forehead and gumbo on my chin.
Progress on the steering shaft. I think I got a U-joint in here, so I got it pointed up the way I want it. I don't have the sprocket here, so when I put the sprocket here, then I can align the bottom sprocket with it, because this can move. I just need to cut those tacks. So I think that will be okay. It may need another brace, but it's hard to tell. Once I get all this panels on there, I may stiffen it up enough. And on the steering, I put this link. This can pivot, and this can pivot, but what it will do will keep the front axle from moving forwards and backwards. It'll fix it in that respect, but it'll let it still bounce. So it's just going to stiffen it all up, make it drive a little better, and I'm going to put an identical one on the other side. And it has a name, but I don't know what it is. My little stop collars came in from McMaster Car. So this is the small chain wheel that I want to use up top. I'm going to weld it onto this, and then I'm going to weld the stop collar onto there, and then I can put that on the shaft and put a little tack on it, and it should be good if I can keep it concentric and copacetic. So with the top sprocket on the shaft, I had it tacked, but I untacked it. I cut the bottom bracket totally loose right here to get it straight. So now I got the chain straight and I got it tight. In the future, to tighten it, I'll have to cut it loose again and re-weld it, but that's no big deal. But I don't think it should ever get loose. It's right where I want it. I'm gonna put a couple of tacks, tack some rods on it, and take the magnets off and make sure it works before I weld it out. I changed my bearing holder design from the bent all thread. I just found a piece of pipe that was a little bit bigger than the bearing. I welded 2 nuts up top. I cut the slot and I drilled out one of the nuts so the bolt spins freely, and now it works really good. I just drop the bearing in and tighten up the bolt. So now I can weld to this without messing up the bearing. So when I hooked up the steering chain, because all this is kind of limber, there's no support yet for this frame, and I have this universal joint here, the shaft would bend down and the chain would get loose when you try to crank it. So I added this little, this is just a bearing and a threaded rod, double nutted, so I can put some tension and keep it on this steering shaft. Now when I'm done, or further down the road, I'm going to have another bearing up here on the outside of the housing, which will really stiffen it up. But it works good. Works really good. I wish I would feel more comfortable with a heavier chain and heavier sprockets. And I got a feeling I might change them down the road before I put this thing on the road. But I'll use the same design. I just may purchase some real sprockets and maybe a smaller one up top and maybe a bigger one up down on the bottom. I still have less than 90 degrees from lock to lock on this steering wheel. I would rather it be a gear down a little more than that. And I'll have to take the hub out of this steering wheel that came with the riding mower and put it into the one I cast. But all good stuff. Right now I'm working on the brake pedal.